In this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know about the two-step drum and bass beat and turn something that sounds boring into something like this. You'll learn everything from drum patterns, sound selection, mixing, and more. My name is 𝗙𝗟𝗟𝗡𝗙 and I've been producing drum and bass now for 28 years with releases on huge labels such as Hospital Records, and now I'm here to take everything I've learned and give it to you. There's a lot of newcomers to drum and bass due to its recent popularity, so let's have a refresher on how to make a pro drum and bass beat. Alright, let's get it. Alright, so in today's video, we're going to be working on a basic drum and bass two-step beat, and we're going to be learning everything about this beat so you can make drum and bass whether you're into jump up, dance floor, or even liquid drum and bass. Learning this beat will be essential. I'm going to show you all the variations and how to make this beat unique. So for the first part, I'm actually doing this in audio. If you see my older videos, I like programming in MIDI, but I want to make this a little more accessible for beginners, and usually with audio, things are a lot more visual so you can see how each hit is placed in context to all the other sounds. So the first thing is to set the BPM or the tempo of your track. Now for drum and bass, it generally ranges from 170 to 175 beats per minute. However, sometimes I haven't seen it as fast as 180 beats per minute, but generally 170 to 175. Sometimes I've even seen slower, especially for more jungle style tracks. It can go as low as 160 beats per minute. For the most part, drum and bass is between 170 to 175, depending on the tempo that you like. Now first, we're going to place a hi-hat into the pattern because I find it just helps when you have a counter, and the hi-hat acts as a counter for our rhythm. So I have a 1-bar loop here, and then I've set the grid to 8th notes, so it's split the bar into 8 notes here. So let's put a hi-hat on each of these spots here, and we can simply duplicate the hits with Command or Control D. So this gives us a reference on how to place the kick and snares with this counter. So let's start with the kick. Generally, we have a kick at the very first beat here, and then followed by a kick over here. And then we're going to place the snare, and the snare is usually placed on the 2nd and 4th beat. So over here, I'll just get rid of this unnecessary space, and then over here. If you're wondering how I'm copying, I'm selecting the note and holding Control or Command. I think for Mac it's actually Option, but you can hold down and click and drag, and it makes a copy. Now we have the basic two-step beat. So for the basic two-step beat, the snare is always on these positions. However, we can also play with the kicks a little to make it a little more funky. For example, we can add additional kicks. We can put one here, or we can move it here. This one is quite popular in jump up drum and bass. Sometimes it's found over here. I kind of call this an accent kick because the main kicks are these ones. You have this one that makes it bounce a little. Some less common positions, if we move this one here, we can move this one over here, or we can move this over here. As you can see, the possibilities are almost endless. You can play with pretty much any position with the kicks, and you can get some interesting rhythms. That one I don't hear much, but it is interesting. So I encourage you to explore. Start with the two-step, which is the basic pattern like this, and then start playing with additional kicks if you like. It just makes your rhythm a little more interesting. Sometimes with the kicks, we can add smaller ghost kicks. So what I'm talking about is little kicks in between the beats. So what we can do is add a new audio track. What I'm going to do is just take this small bit here and copy it over here, but instead we're just gonna play it over here so we can play with the volumes. So with little kicks like that, I like to like shorten the attack, something like that. We can maybe even add one here. You notice how it sounds a bit tighter. It gives it more of a bounce. You find these kind of rhythms more common in neural drum and bass. You can make it even shorter like this. Notice that I'm adding fades here to make the kicks really nice and tight. I think like this sounds better. But notice the fades. You can actually adjust the strength of this fades by playing with this little blue dot in the fade. So we can make it tighter in this manner. The reason why I put it on this lane is you can now adjust the ghost kicks here by adjusting the mix here, bringing it down. Alright, so that's pretty much for the kicks. Let's talk about the hi-hats. So if you want to get away from just the common 8-note pattern, we can go like this. So we have more of a quarter note pattern, which is just 4 hi-hats. This is common in more newer drum and bass, especially in jump up and rollers. A neat way to make this a little more interesting is use a completely different hi-hat to alternate between the 4. So I can grab this hi-hat here and then duplicate it. Now, getting the mix of your drum hits while you lace them down is important. So I'm noticing that this hi-hat is a bit loud, so we can go into the mixer and bring this down. Adjust the taste. I find around -5 to -6 is good for this one. Notice there's a lot more funk now with the alternating hi-hats. One step further, add another hi-hat at the end of the phrase here. So instead of this, we're going to replace it. Of course, adjust the level, bring it down. Just having more hi-hats in your pattern makes the rhythm more interesting. Of course, it doesn't have to be here. You can place it perhaps over here. You can move this one here. Or over here. Or over here. You're gonna have to play around and find what sounds good for your beat. So I know many of you are at the beginning of your music production journey. In today's digital age, creating a following and getting your music out there is crucial. The era when record labels held all the power is over, and now countless independent artists are making a name for themselves with a solid social media strategy. This brings me to why I think Skillshare's new learning paths could be a game changer for you. Learning paths are curated sequences of video classes designed to help you master a specific skill. For instance, the social media expression create for Instagram and TikTok learning path has been invaluable to me. It offers a series of classes to provide a comprehensive guide for those unsure where to start with their social media marketing. It offers a series of classes that provide a comprehensive guide for those unsure where to start with their social media marketing. From decoding the algorithms of TikTok and Instagram to crafting engaging content, this learning path equips you with the essentials to kickstart your social media presence. For those unfamiliar, Skillshare is an online learning platform with thousands of classes in various creative and entrepreneurial fields. I'm excited to share that the first 500 people that use my link below will get 1 month free trial of Skillshare. It's a fantastic opportunity to start exploring and expanding on your creative skills. And hey, I'd love to hear about your progress and see what you've created after diving into these classes. Let's build a community of creative, independent artists together. Thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video and supporting our music production community. Now, to make the drum and bass beat more interesting, we have to employ ghost notes. So earlier we talked about adding ghost kicks, which is a little less common in dance floor and jump up and roller drum and bass. But ghost snares is pretty common in drum and bass. That's simply little snares that are placed, once again, in between the beats. So remember, our beat, the grid is showing the 8th note view. To get into the ghost note view, you just have to go and change it to 16th notes. So these placements in between the 8th notes is what are usually the ghost note positions. So what you want to do is find a tight sounding snare. Usually if you're using splice, you can just look up ghost snare, or you can just take a snare and pitch it up. For example, we can take this snare that we had, the cap snare, and place it here and adjust the tightness like that. And you may want to pitch it up. These are 2 ghost note placements that are very common in drum and bass. We might want to make it even tighter like this. Or in between, so like this. By the way, the shortcut to increase or decrease the granularity of your grid is to hold Control on the PC, and then 2 decreases the granularity and 1 increases the granularity. Very useful tip. Now with this Ghost Snare, I simply used the exact same snare we used for the 2 and 4. I simply made it super short, so it's very tight and small. One other trick you can do is go into the snares. I'm just gonna highlight both of them. Note when you highlight both of them, when you change the parameters here, it changes for both samples. So what we can do is we can change the pitch. So when I change the pitch of drum hits, I like to unwarp it because warping creates artifacts and makes it sound a bit weird and sludgy. So turn off warp mode and then play with changing the pitch of the Ghost Snares. So I pitched it by 3 semitones using the pitch wheel here. Now it sounds a lot more different from the main snares. And that's the goal of the Ghost Snares, to make it sound a little bit different. As well, you may want to decrease the volume so you can adjust the volume in the mix. Or again, you can do it right in the audio by adjusting the gain here. And that way we get a visual cue that is actually quieter. So I'll bring it down to -6. You don't always need to use the same snare as the Ghost Snares. You can just find an actual Ghost Snare sample. For example, like I was saying earlier on Splice, there's tons of Ghost Snares. Here's a good one that we can just import right off the bat. So this time I'm just putting it here. Sometimes you just need one. You can place it here. You can try more or less common positions like here. Or even here. But generally, they're either here or here. But do encourage you to try different positions. You might find something new and exciting. Now, I just want to make this a bit tighter, so I'm just going to adjust the fades here. And then I'm going to bring down the mix. Alright, once you have the kick, snare, hi-hats, and ghost snares, you might want to fill up the space in between the beats with air. A good way to fill in the air is to use ride cymbals, because ride cymbals have a lot of high frequencies and it's a longer sound that fills in that silence between the gaps. So we can take a ride shot like here and simply place it either on the eighth notes or quarter notes like this. So either like this or like this. Now obviously adjust the mix. I like it super low just to fill in that air. It doesn't need to be super high. Even -15 works. Here's without. Here's with. Notice how it fills out that air. Let's try it in quarter notes. I like that. It kind of lets the beat breathe a little. Sometimes you might even have it just like that, just 2 ride cymbals. And with that, you can also play with the position, maybe like this, to mirror the kicks. Or like this, over here. The possibilities are nearly limitless. Alright, so this is our basic beat. Now here's a secret that drum and bass users use to add a little more humanization and groove to that beat. And that's the use of layering breakbeats over your main drum hits. So I have a number of break loops from the Hybrid Breaks sample pack here. Beats like these are perfect for layering over drum and bass because they're played by a live drummer and has those inconsistencies or kind of a human groove to the beat that adds something a little bit extra that a computer can't achieve solely. If you want to learn more about the Hybrid Breaks drum pack, you can learn more on deviantaudio.com or check it out in the links below. I'm going to use the Funk Ride 3 loop here. And I'm going to bring this in. Now, what I like to do is go into the actual break because we're going to be playing and rearranging it. What we like is the groove of these little ghost shuffles. This bit here and here is that ghost snare position. You see how it's a bit off the grid if we look at the 16th note grid. However, I do like having the kick and snares to line up exactly. So sometimes we might have to go into the audio and just make sure the pieces are snapped right on the grid because this is played once again by a live drummer. you have pieces that are not exactly on the grid, and that's what gives the drummer its unique sound. But sometimes we want just the main kick and snares to line up with the grid, so everything's in line with your drum hit. So all I'm doing is just either highlighting over here and double click, or making a new warp marker by double clicking on the ruler here, and then we can move it and snap it on. So this one is fine over here. We'll keep those. Might want to keep this one a little tighter. So I brought that over. This one's okay here. Might want to drag this over here. So these two are still a bit off grid. That just makes it sound a bit more funky. And that's sounding great. And now the thing is, our drum groove already has a kick and snare, right? So instead of cluttering the mix of the kick and snare of this drum loop, all we're looking for is kind of those kind of nuances and the air and the shuffles of this break. We don't need the kick and snares because we already have a kick and snare in our beat. This would just clutter up the mix. So what we can do is we can simply replace this kick with this hi-hat here. This is why I like to line up the main hits, because we can simply highlight the slice, hold control, click and drag and copy it. And we can do the same for this kick here and replace it. Now hearing a bit of a click on this hit here, so we can just add a bit of fade here. And it's sounding good. Now, we can do the same with the snares. We can replace it with the ride. But here's another trick you can do. You can take the snare, just make sure it's cut. So you can highlight the snare, hit Control or Command E. That just slices it. And then simply just add a fade to the snare. Because we really just don't want the attack to clutter up the attack of our main snare. So adding a fade works. Same with this one over here. So I'm noticing there's a click here, so just add a fade at the end of this hi-hat here. That's sounding good. Then bring back the main hits. Here's without. Notice how that adds a lot more groove. And because of this, we might not even need these two ghost notes here, because we already have ghost notes here. I can hear that's kind of clanging with these ones because these are right on the grid, whereas these ones are humanized. So we can mute these ones. And that sounds a lot more funky. Now, since we don't need any of the bottom end from this layer, just to play it safe, I have an EQ here that removes all the bottom end. I'm just using a high pass here, taking everything from 220 hertz and below. Even around 110 should be fine. You're just getting rid of the bass notes. But depending on how you want it to sound, you can increase it. Right? You may want to even accentuate the highs. And possibly the mids to bring up that ghost note. Sounding fresh. Another thing you can do is you can highlight this and go into the audio view by hitting Shift Tab. Now, because this is a drum loop, I do want to keep the warp on, and then you can play with the pitching. I'm pitching at 3 notes, so let's try 6. That sounds super fresh. So I pitch it up by 6, keeping the warp on. Remember to adjust the mix. So I'm going to bring the mix of this breakdown. Sometimes what I like to do is bring all the way down and slowly bring it up. Sometimes it's easier to find the right mix by doing that. That's sounding fresh. One more step to adding more uniqueness to your drum pattern is employing additional top loops such as shaker loops, tambourine loops, or even percussion or conga loops. So you can add a quick shaker like this. Because the shaker again is played by humans, so it sounds really nice on top of the drum and bass break. We can double time this by holding down Shift and then condensing it like that. And that double time shaker tends to sound really good with drum and bass as well. If you want a sharper or tighter sounding a shaker, you can add a one-shot shaker like that. And what I like to do is make it super tight and then put it on every 16th note. Except make this quieter, so every other one a bit quieter, so we can bring this down by negative like 7, for example. Just duplicate all the way across like that. Adjust the mix, of course. Before. After. Notice the energy this fast hi-hat or shaker brings to the drum groove. You can make it tighter by making them shorter as well, like this. Just make sure you add a bit of a fade to it, like that. And then we'll just replace it. It just adds something extra to that rhythm. Now, because we have a number of top sounds such as the hi-hat, the ride, the break, and even the shakers, we can play with the panning of certain sounds to make this drum groove sound a little more dimensional. So usually I keep the main hi-hats in the center. That's not a hard rule. You can also pan those as well. But I might pan, for example, these fast shakers a bit to the left. So around, I'd like to be subtle. So like left around 8 to 10 to the left, or even 16. I find that if you go past around 30, it sounds a bit too extreme. So around, I like around 12 to the left, and then maybe this ride or maybe the break can be 12 to the right. And this singular ride, maybe it can be 8 to the right. Actually, I like the main cymbal in the center. That just makes the break sound a little more dimensional. Now, if you want to make those ghost hits a bit tighter, we can line these ghost hits right on the grid as well. And now we can bring these guys back. And this will give it an interesting shuffle. Makes it sound tighter in this area. Once you have all your hits placed, you can play with also the pitching of the samples. So we talked about pitching some of the ghost hits, but you can also play with the pitching of the kick. Sometimes you might want a pitched up kick, right? So you may want to go into the sample, again, go into it, turn off warp so it doesn't make the sample warbly or sludgy, and then try pitching it up or down. Pitched up kicks are very common in drum and bass because we have the bass lines and we don't need the kick to sound so boomy. So one way to make the kick sound less boomy is to pitch it up as opposed to regular pitch. It's really up to you and how you want it to sound. The snare likely can be pitched up as well. Turn off warp. I think just one semitone up works for the snare. Finally, you might want to play with the tightness of the kick and snare. For example, we might want to shorten it and add a fade. Sometimes to add more variation, the main one could be bigger. So leave the fade out like that. It's just nice sometimes to have this one to be a bit different from this one. So we can make this a bit shorter and tighter like that. Likewise, we can make the snare shorter. Play with the fade position using the dot. For this instance, I want the snare to sound exactly the same every time it hits, so I'm just going to make a copy. However, there are instances where you may want the snare to have a subtle difference, so you can play with the fade or even the tuning of the snare. But for this type of roller rhythm, I like it just like that. Now for drum and bass, sample selection for your drum hits is super important because they're going to dictate how your drums are going to sound. Especially if you're going for a specific sound of drum and bass. For example, if you're going for dance floor drum and bass, you may want the snares to sound bigger and fuller. Where if you're doing rollers, you might want the hits to be more tighter and sharp. For liquid, you might want the hits to sound more organic. So sound selection is very important because they're going to direct the sound of your drum loop and your track. So our main drum loop over here, Let's see what happens if we replace the kick and snares. So I'm going to take this kick and this snare and this snare. Now, sometimes if you notice the kick is overlaying the snare, you may want to cut it, perhaps add a bit of a fade here. And this one sounds a bit boomy, so I'm going to shorten it, add a fade. And this one, I might want to make shorter again, just to add some variation. So simply by using different kick and snares, we've changed the vibe of the track. All right, let's try one more. Let's take this kick here. And let's try a tighter snare like this. And then we're actually going to try a different hi-hat. Let's take this hi-hat here. Nice and tight hi-hat. Just duplicate all the way across. Take out these hits over here for a different vibe. And we want to pitch up the kick over here. Once again, turn off warp. This is a really good loop for either rollers or minimal or even liquid drum and bass. Whereas this one here, this could work for jump up or even neural. And over here, this could work for rollers or a jump up track. Notice how different each one sounds. And this is simply all done by using different sample sources. All right, once you have all the sounds and the pattern laid out, what I like to do is put all the layers into a drum group. So you can simply highlight all the layers, right click, and then group the tracks. I've already grouped them into a drum group here. And from here, you can add effects such as saturator, compressor, or even parallel compressor to glue the sounds together. And this will alter the energy of the drums. So for example, you might want to add Ableton's stock drum bus effect. This is really useful for gluing sounds together. Depending on the settings, it might sound harsh, so you may want to play with it. You can simply click on this icon here and go through the different presets in the drum bus. Notice with each setting completely changes the character of the drums. So this is a neat effect to play with. You may want to play with the dry and wet so it's not so extreme. Another thing you can do is you can add a clipper to the drums. So this is helpful if I bring in a visualizer. So right now, this is how the drums look like. Essentially with a clipper is you're squaring off the peaks. So simple way, you can download a free clip or you can use Ableton Saturator. You just turn on soft clip. And all we're doing is increasing the drive. Now we may want to adjust the gain. If we're pushing the drive by 8, you want to bring the utility, which is the gain control, down by 8 here. So that when you turn it on and off, you get an apples to apples comparison. Notice how it squashes it. That's more of an artistic preference. You might want the drums to sound cleaner. In that case, you may not want to include this step. Another way to achieve it, you can use the glue compressor, turn on soft clip once again, and increase the makeup. Once again, use utility. If we're bringing the makeup by 8, bring the gain down by 8. So this is a true clipper. It's completely squared off. Now my settings are kind of extreme. 8 really squeezes it. Let's bring it down by 6 instead. Here's with it off. So that's neat. You can also use funky effects like this one, which is a parallel compressor. It's called I Heart New York 2. Just makes this drum sound more punchy. Otherwise, these are all just additional steps. You don't really need it if the drums are sounding good. It's just adding spice to your drum track. All right, now that we have our drums, why don't we hear in context with some bass so we can hear how it would sound in the track. So I have some sounds here. And then I got a wobble bass here. And then this sound here. These are all sounds I'm working on for the new Gnarly Volume 2. Is hopefully coming out sometime this year. Still need to put a lot more work into it. But let's hear how this track sounds. Oh yeah, we got some drum and bass. Hope you enjoyed learning everything about the basic two-step drum and bass beat. Try different placements of notes and even sound selections. You might just find the next fire beat. These are basic and rudimentary skills, but once you master them, you're on your way to becoming a pro drum and bass producer. If you want to support, I have a number of sample packs, preset packs, and Ableton kits to help you along your journey. You can learn more at deviantaudio.com. down in the links below. If you want to learn how to arrange drum and bass, check this playlist up here. And if you want to learn how to create the dirtiest drum and bass sounds, check this playlist up here. Alright guys, until the next video, stay creative, stay safe, and peace out.